Hello. Welcome, everyone, to the March 2018 Wikimedia Foundation Metrics and Activities meeting. I am Chuck Rosloff. I am a lawyer here at the Foundation, and I'll be hosting today, this month. So the theme for the meeting this month is Wikimedia Beyond Its Beginnings. So as we all know, this all started with Wikipedia, and so we will be taking a look over the next hour at things that have been added to the Wikimedia movement since then. We've come very far, and we'll talk about some of the exciting changes. Here is the agenda. I'll be welcoming, give a brief movement update. There'll be a presentation about Wikivoyage, a presentation about structured data on Wikimedia Commons and a GLAM update, and a presentation about Visual Editor. And then you can ask questions, and we'll have time for Wiki Love at the end. So the movement update. First, we've begun to release results from research on Wikipedia readers, illustrating some of the reasons why people read Wikipedia. I've launched auto-save edits feature, and the Foundation has released its latest transparency report, highlighting requests received from July to December 2017 to alter or remove content. Coming up in April, there's the Wikimedia Conference 2018 in Berlin for Wikimedia affiliates to discuss issues. There's a survey for Wikimedia contributors and communities as part of the Community Engagements Insights project, and is launching this week. And there's a GLAM Wiki conference being held in Tel Aviv in November that is now accepting submissions. So first up, we have Alexander Zierlein with an update presentation on Wikivoyage.
Good morning. Thank you for the introduction. Let me make sure that you hear me.
Yes.
Can you hear me? Yeah, good. So I'm going to share some experiences that we have at Wikivoyage, and I would be grateful if you change the next slide for me, or actually one slide more. Yeah. So Wikivoyage is a free travel guide. It has been known for quite a long time as Wiki Travel, but in 2012 the community decided to migrate and become a sister project of Wikimedia Foundation. That means that beginning of this year, we celebrated the 5th anniversary of becoming the sister project of Wikimedia Foundation. Wikivoyage is a practical travel guide. It covers different practical aspects of travel. It tells you where to go, why to go, how to reach the destination, what to see there, and where to stay and eat. And we used to say that Wikivoyage is written by travelers and for travelers. It means that you go on a business trip or on a holiday trip, or maybe you just go to a new restaurant in your city. You get some experience, some first-hand experience, and then you share it with other travelers using Wikivoyage. This is one important difference from Wikipedia, that we rely on the first-hand experience, on something that Wikipedia considers original research. The second difference is that we do not organize our content as long texts, but we used to organize it into listings. And that's something that you see on the right, in the right part of the slide, that we have all the content structured. First goes the name of the place, then goes the address, then maybe the phone number, the opening hours, and then the text description. It's also important that our content is geocoded. You see that each listing is preceded by this colored box with a number. And this number, if you click on it, it brings you into the map, so you can see where the object is, where different objects are in the city, and then you can navigate the city using Wikivoyage. So that was the very short, basically 1-minute introduction into Wikivoyage. Now let's go to the next slide. And well, when I have seen the name of this meeting, I knew that I have to present some metrics. And so here is the metrics for Wikivoyage. We write it in 19 different languages. And in the first line of the table, you can see the number of articles divided by 1,000 for each language version. You may notice that these numbers are not very high in comparison to Wikipedia, but this is because Wikivoyage only writes articles about travel destinations. There is a limited number of places where people may want to go, so there is some intrinsic limit on the number of articles in Wikivoyage, but these articles are never finished in the sense that they have to be updated because some travel information changes every now and then, so we constantly have to update our articles. And this is reflected in the fact that the number of edits per article is quite high. It's basically similar to Wikipedia in the same language, and it's much higher than in other sister projects like Wikiversity or Wikibooks, for example. The second metrics parameter that I wanted to mention today is the number of very active editors, those editors who made more than 100 edits per month. This is a rather high threshold, but it tells you basically how many people are involved into each language version of Wikivoyage as an active community, how many people come to the project every day to do some routine maintenance work, to do patroning of recent changes and things like that. And you see that we have some substantial number of contributors in 5 language versions, but in all the other language versions, we have the numbers between 0 and 2. So there are maybe 1 or 2 people who are interested in the development of the project, but they feel quite lonely because they don't really have a community to share and to discuss. And we felt it is a problem, and we tried to get some to increase the participation in Wikivoyage by doing some advertisement by means of the central notice and by means of organizing an editathon. Let's go to the next slide now. This is about the Wikivoyage editathon, and I believe that many of you have seen this central notice that appeared in Wikipedia and in Commons during February, and the central notice invited you to make some edits in Wikivoyage. By the way, let me thank once again Joseph for setting up this central notice for us. We suggested that new editors make rather simple edits, that they add new objects of interest for travelers, and that they update information on the existing objects. The motivation was mostly interest. We tried to arrange some prizes, but you can see that only 2 languages managed to find some small prizes, some small souvenirs, and others just relied on the interest. Nevertheless, the level of participation was quite high, and now we have the statistics for February. We can see that the number of edits and the number of editors increased between 50 and 100% compared to our normal level. I think there will be some more statistics on this right after my presentation, but now let me also mention that 1 month after the editathon, we see some problem with editor retention. Basically, in bigger language versions, some of the new editors prefer to stay and really see the increased number of persistent editors. But in smaller language versions, we have seen people who came to make edits in February, but on 1st of March, they left. So we're still facing this problem with smaller language versions of Wikivoyage, how to attract really interested participants, how to attract active travelers. Let's go to the next slide now. So here I basically list several other travel-related projects on the web that can be considered as direct or indirect competitors of Wikivoyage. So we know that many people prefer to use not crowdsourced content in Wikivoyage, but they choose the commercial or printed travel guides because they believe that this information is more trustable, is more reliable than what they find in Wikivoyage. Also, when it comes to the writing, some people say that they prefer a more personalized writing style, and therefore they prefer to leave reviews on sites like TripAdvisor, or they prefer to write something in their own travel blogs and not use some community style that we have in Wikivoyage. So we have quite tough competition in this field of travel-related information, and we have to really fight for the new readers and editors. There are several things where we believe Wikivoyage is really better than the others. I list these aspects on the slide. Let me explain just one of them. The fact that we have no space restrictions means that we can put a lot more content than, for example, the guidebooks that you can buy in the store. We can use many illustrations, and we can also cover many destinations that are not so often visited by tourists. We think it's quite important because nowadays more and more people travel, but they used to travel to the same places like everyone who goes to Europe wants to go to Paris or to Venice, and it means that the cities become extremely crowded with tourists. On the other hand, there are lots of other interesting places that you do not find in guidebooks, but they're still worth visiting. For example, the photo that you see on the slide is my personal discovery from last year. That's the city of Sarajevo, the rare Muslim city in the middle of Europe, and that's something that you do not find in normal guidebooks, but on Wikivoyage we have very extensive content on the city and really have enough information that you need to go there and to organize your visit. Still, all these advantages that we have, they're mostly related to the content, and that's something that we continue to develop. But we also think that the technical developments are very important, and that's something that I'm going to cover in the rest of my talk. So let's go to the next slide now. That will be about the maps, because maps are very important for every travel guide. We basically realized that from the very beginning, so already in 2013, we had some simple script written by one of the community members from German Wikivoyage. The script was collecting geodata contained in an article and then displaying this geodata on the map. Then later on, the same idea was integrated into the cartographer extension that was developed with great help by Yuri Astrahan. Now, if you go to every Wikivoyage article, you will see such a map like the one that I show on the slide. So you can click on different objects, you can see where they are, you can explore them, you can also click on the map markers, and then you will see this photos popping up, and so you can really explore the city using Wikivoyage. Of course, there are still many open problems with this cartographer extension. For example, everything works very well when we have the map of San Francisco, but if you try to open the same map for the city in China, you will see that all the labels are in Chinese. So that's not terribly useful for most of us. We cannot read it, which means that we have to do some language localization. And there are in fact quite a few issues with these maps, and that's one of the reasons why Wikivoyage was behind the maps as one of the community wish list. It's one item in the community wish list from last year, and really hope that this direction will be continued, because every travel guide heavily relies on the maps. Another aspect, and this is the subject of the next slide. Yeah, could you change the slide for me? Thank you. Yeah, so another aspect is about using the structured data, not in the sense of the structured data on Commons, but also in the sense of having some data that we use stored at Wikidata and then shared between different languages. For example, we have information like prices or opening hours, and this is the obvious data to be stored at Wikidata and shared. But of course, we have to make sure that our editors can easily update this information, because it changes with time and it has to be updated. We actually tried to develop this using the so-called listing editor, which is the visual tool for editing individual parameters of a listing. Something you can see on the slide, that if I click on the small edit button next to the listing, I open this table, and in this table I can see all the different parameters. This is the German version, so everything is in German. And then I can edit any of these parameters independently, and this is very useful for new editors who do not want to work with the standard wiki markup. So now we try to connect this to Wikidata, and you see that some of the fields are already coming from Wikidata, but there's still quite a long way to go to arrange all the necessary features. And well, in fact, we are curious if the situation can be similar to the maps, if someone else may be interested in similar functionality, and if we could build something together, because this feature will be very useful for all Wikivoyagers. So finally, let me mention a few other aspects. That will be the last slide. Hope you can change it for me. Yeah, here. So here I would like to mention just one feature, the mobile application, the mobile app. Well, nowadays, we all use information on smartphones, and storing the text content in smartphone is one thing, but for travel, we need not only the text, not only the travel guide itself, but also the map. So we need some way to simultaneously download maps and travel guides into smartphones. And we think that if such a solution would be created, then it will be rather unique, because nobody offers anything like that on the travel market. And this is something that this could be a very efficient way to use the content of Wikivoyage. And then if more people use Wikivoyage, then also more people come to edit Wikivoyage. So, okay, now I think my time is running out. I would like to stop here. There are a few points mentioned as summary. We have some technical developments that started on Wikivoyage. This is related to the cartographer extension and also to the Wikidata page banner. We hope that we could also do more in the future, and I would be happy to answer your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alexander. Next up, we have Joseph Seddon from Advancement to talk about Central Notice.
Yeah, so this is just to follow up on what Alexander just discussed. So as was mentioned, we used a Central Notice campaign for this editathon, whereby we were showing banners on Wikipedia and other projects and directing people to Wikivoyage. Next slide, please. So it's no surprise that when you even use a fraction of Wikipedia's traffic to showcase a small project to readers, that it has a huge impact on its ranking. In terms of Wikivoyage.org's collective Alexa rank, it increased from 24,000 to 15,000. For comparison, Wikitravel has a Alexa ranking of around 10,000. Next slide, please. So the more interesting thing is that this campaign has had a long-term effect potentially on the readership of Wikivoyage post-campaign. On both mobile and desktop, we saw significant increases on the number of readers, page views on Wikivoyage editions. I do apologize. Just need to mute someone. Sorry about that. And this increase has persisted 3 weeks after the end of the campaign. Next slide, please. As you can expect, daily unique devices also increased this is just information for the English Wikivoyage, 10% increases in terms of daily unique devices. The interesting thing is that the new readers that were coming onto the site were actually reading more page views now. And so overall engagement with the site has also increased by 14% in terms of page views per unique device. Next slide. So this was entirely an accidental discovery. This means that we have a lot more questions that we need to look into. Are these readers going to be persistent in terms of their staying power? Is this a cumulative effect that we can build up over a period of time? Are these just simply lapsed readers that we're bringing back into the project? And we need to kind of examine whether there's any kind of ceiling effect. And so the next step will be, in conjunction with the Wikivoyage community, is that we're going to rerun this in a more focused and controlled experiment. We're going to focus on reader engagement. We're going to split this up into 2 cohorts across 2 different experiments. And that will really examine whether there is a long-term possibility of being able to bring smaller projects like Wikivoyage, like Wikinews, more into the mainstream, increasing their readership and hopefully providing more sustainability for them in the future. Thank you very much.
Next up, to kick off this presentation on structured data on Commons, we have Amanda Bittaker. It's a program manager.
Why, thank you. Can I have the clicker as well? Thanks. I mean, you can do the clicking if you like. So yes, I am Amanda Bittaker. I'm the program manager for structured data on Commons. I'm actually here just to give a super brief intro about the program in general before Sandra, one of our GLAM strategists, shares a bit about the research that we've been doing, and especially the GLAM generative user research that Jonathan Morgan and the structured data on Commons team did about one of our key audiences, GLAMs. So the program in general is about making Commons more used by making it machine readable, right? We want to make media and metadata easier to upload, edit, find, and reuse. Overall goal. And the way that we want to do that, the changes that we want to see, are these 5 things. And notice one of them is satisfy the GLAM use case. So GLAMs share a lot of quality educational content on Commons, and we want to make sure that as we're making all these changes on Commons, we're considering their needs and what works best for them. So Sandra is going to share a little bit about the process that we're using. all the way through the generative user research that JMO did, through how that is, how we're incorporating that into our product design decisions. So, Sandra, are you online?
I am very ready. I hope everyone can hear me well. Thanks, Amanda, for the introduction. I'm Sandra. I work as a GLAM wiki strategist for the Structured Data and Commons project. In this slide, you see a very random, but still quite representative sample of the kind of content that GLAMs contribute to Wikimedia Commons. In 2009, approximately, the GLAM wiki movement, or as you could call it, started collaborations with GLAM institutions, cultural institutions, with Wikimedia volunteers. And today, from the 45 million files that we probably have on Commons, we know that several millions of them have been contributed through collaborations with cultural institutions around the world. So they contribute a diversity of files, from historical photographs to scientific specimens. On the bottom left, you see a pig heart. If you were wondering what that red blob would be, digitized books, scans, maps, historical maps, long-form documentary videos. We have cultural institutions who contribute historical newsreels, etc. To also more STEM materials, including 3D models and medical research slides. That's the very pink thing at the bottom is a medical research slide. I think it's a scan of some kind of virus. I'm not very familiar with the exact content of that. But that shows a bit, you know, the breadth of what GLAMs contribute to our content, and content that is also very broadly used in illustrating our Wikimedia projects. So GLAMs are a very important target audience for structured data on Commons, especially also in the long run. We hope to see much more broad and diverse contribution to Commons through them. Next slide, please. So quite at the beginning of the Structured Data on Commons project, we wanted to know very well what this target group of ours, what this audience really needs from Commons. And as Amanda said when she introduced the project, Jonathan Morgan and Niharika Vet from the research team at the Wikimedia Foundation have done some very thorough research on GLAMs and their needs on with regards to Commons. How do they currently use Commons? How do they do uploads? How do they collaborate with our volunteers, with our affiliates? And what are the pain points and the difficulties they encounter? The research itself started, in fact, in February 2017, when a group of European GLAM wiki coordinators from European chapters and affiliates gathered in Paris. This group came together and talked about, the first steps that should be taken for such a research. And then by the last quarter of last not fiscal year, but 2017, so from October till December 2017, Jonathan did thorough interviews with GLAM staff members, so not really community members, but also people working for GLAMs from 5 continents, quite diverse group. And we following that, we also did a survey that was advertised through a lot of the typical GLAM wiki channels that got more than 100 responses. And that resulted in quite, rich research results that I will talk about a bit later. One of the things we also did, and especially Niharika worked on that, is we created personas that are kind of, average kind of randomized or anonymized typical GLAM contributors. For instance, on the right of this slide, you see the persona of Sammy. She is a young Wikimedian in residence, still trying to get familiar with our community, and the persona shows what kind of activities she does on Commons and what kind of difficulties she encounters with that. Next slide, please. One thing we did together with the research, when the research itself was happening, when the interviews were being conducted and the survey was running, was to map out the typical workflows that GLAMs do on Commons. And that's a quite complicated workflow. I won't go too deeply into that. It's also something that is not documented on Wiki yet. It's still in internal documents, but I think it's quite valuable through these interviews that we analyzed and through the context that we have in our own experience. We now have a quite precise idea of the kind of different steps that GLAMs do when uploading and reusing content from Commons, and that's something that we can use in the project. Next slide, please. Another step that we did is we took the research results that Jonathan very well summarized on Meta, and we went through them in quite a lot of detail. So we analyzed the research results very thoroughly. And what we did is we summarized them in a very big spreadsheet, which we lovingly called the list of pain. In fact, a list of pain points and difficulties that we broke down into different categories. And with our whole team, we took quite a few hours to go through that list very thoroughly and to assign the different difficulties, the difficult pain points encountered by the different types of GLAMs, and to assign them to the specific teams, either product team or the outreach team and people like me, GLAM strategists. So at this moment, you will see some fabricator tasks, if you're into that, popping up that are quite closely related to the findings that have been discovered in the research. Next slide, please. Just for fun, this is a very small selection of our list of pain spreadsheets, which shows how we broke down all the points that were outlined in the research, the difficulties that GLAMs encounter, and how we analyzed them, determined whether they were in project scope, not in project scope, and who within our teams would tackle them. Next slide, please. So what's next? I guess that's probably the most interesting part. We could build upon quite solid research, and as I hope I could demonstrate, we analyzed the research quite well, and I hope as a team we could process them quite well. For my work as a GLAM strategist, this has quite direct consequences in, for instance, the work that will kick off in the next quarter. From April on, we will start, for instance, doing pilot projects with GLAM institutions and Wikimedians and affiliates. One of the things that came out of the research as a pain point, as a general pain point for both GLAM contributors to Commons, but also for volunteers contributing to Commons, is the severe lack of documentation. And that is, of course, only going to get more complex and worse when Wikimedia Commons is being converted to structured data and when new technology is introduced there. So there will be a very big need for documentation and for good examples on how to use this new technology. So one of the things that I will be focusing on in my work as a direct result of the research being done in the previous quarters is to go look for very good pilot projects, diverse pilot projects that highlight all the new ways in which structured data can be used on Wikimedia Commons in the future, and to document this very well. That's one thing you will see coming when you follow the project. Next slide, please. A second problem that we saw, and it's a quite complex problem, is in fact GLAMs have a hard time translating the data that they have there in their own databases to Commons. GLAMs have diverse ways to describe things. If you're familiar with libraries tend to use, for instance, MARC as a metadata format. Archives have their own formats. Museums have their own ways to describe things in their databases. And that is often, we notice, a very hard thing to map to the way that media is being described on Wikimedia Commons. So this mapping is a difficult, a pain point, you could say. Another thing that I will do in response to that, also discovered in the research, is to work on mapping the GLAM metadata schemes, the most typically, most broadly used metadata schemes and metadata standards in the GLAM fields to Wikidata and to Wikimedia Commons, to make sure that in the future, through structured data, the upload process and the reuse process will become smoother than it used to be. Next slide, please. And this is a conclusive slide. This was just a very thin slice of all the work that is going on in structured data and Commons. It's just about the GLAM work. If you're interested in more of the things that are going on, please go to Commons itself, search for structured data. You will find our information page about the project with lots of FAQs and information materials. And we do have a pretty nice newsletter that is sent out every 2 or 3 months, which will keep you up to date about the project. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra and Amanda. Next up, to talk about the past, present, and future of Visual Editor, we have Ed Sanders, Principal Software Engineer on the editing team.
Hello. I'm going to get my slide shared. Okay.
Yes, I believe we are seeing the slides.
Good. We're good to go. So hi, I'm Ed Sanders, the lead developer of the editing team, and I'm going to talk to you a bit about the past, present, and future of the visual editor. So I thought I'd start with this quote that I think really nicely summarizes how far we've come with the editing experience. For a lot of people who've been editing since the early days, Visual Editor is still seen as a fairly recent development, and they still do most of their work in Wikitext. But I think enough time has passed now that we have a whole subset of the community who won't have known a Wikipedia without Visual Editor, and it's been their primary editor since day one. So I thought now would be a good time to look at how our communities have changed since then and the effect that Visual Editor has had. So going back to day one, here's how that team looked when I joined. I've mostly just included this slide so we can wonder how Rowan hasn't aged a day. But more importantly, this is how Visual Editor looked back in 2013 when I joined the team. Over the next 4 months, leading up to our first rollout before Wikimedia Hong Kong, we improved on this a lot. We added supports for images, templates, and references, and other bits and pieces. In our testing, we were already seeing a very low rate of bugs resulting in bad wiki text. And the editor was released as an optional feature, but when we multiplied that very low rate by the number of users on the English Wikipedia, it resulted in a fairly reasonable addition to an already strained review queue. So understandably, a lot of users weren't happy about it. But over the next few years, we fixed many of those bugs and added some indispensable features such as table editing and automatic citations. We worked with newer communities who are happy to use this tool to attract more users and weren't facing the same struggles with backlogs that the large communities were. Importantly, we weren't in a hurry to force Visual Editor on the communities that had pushed back. And eventually this paid off. 2 years ago, the German Wikipedia, the second largest wiki by activity, formed this Visual Editor Appreciation Society and organized amongst themselves making Visual Editor the primary editor on the site. That was a huge turnaround from just a few years ago when they were writing site code to forcefully disable the editor. And I think is a real testament to the hard work the team put into the product. This table shows us that 16 out of the top 20 Wikipedias are giving Visual Editor as the primary editor to new users. It's also available as a secondary editor on those other sites. In fact, out of about 300 Wikipedias, only 3 communities are not making Visual Editor the default action. There's another 9, including Chinese, that are held back because of language variant support. It's also worth calling out the Japanese, Korean, Arabic, and Farsi from this list, as they are a few of the 55 wikis where Visual Editor is the only editor we present to new users. And it's actually not hard to see why, because Wikitext can be even harder to read in languages that don't use Latin script, as Latin script words are still used for tags and file names on those wikis. And it's especially bad on right-to-left wikis. This is a snippet, sorry, I'll wait for that slide. This is a snippet of wiki text from near the top of a featured article on Arabic Wikipedia. So this is very typical. I've highlighted in green a ref tag. And as you can see, it's all over the place. And even one of the angle brackets is flipped. This is not a bug. This is actually how it's supposed to look. Please direct your rage at Moriel, who I'm sure will be happy to explain why this is all perfectly logical. But even in English, let's not forget how off-putting Wikitext can be to new users. Before we launched in 2013, we did some user testing with a group of users we thought were qualified to be great editors but hadn't edited before. I encourage you to look up the videos, but here's some highlights from the transcripts. So this is their first reaction to seeing Wikitext. These are people with advanced degrees, who'd be great contributors. And another one. But one look at the wiki text and they thought, this isn't for me. There was a study done in 2015 that I think a few of us will be familiar with, which showed that giving people Visual Editor didn't improve the edit success rate for new users. There was a problem with this result in that it was only looking at people who signed up and at least tried to make an edit. So it did exclude people who simply clicked edit and immediately were put off by what they saw. So what I want to show you now is the raw data we've been collecting since then for all users interacting with the different editors. This is simply the success rate of editors making their first edit in Wikitext versus Visual Editor. As you can see, the difference is quite striking. And if we zoom out, you can see the comparative success rates for people who've made more than one edit, more than 5, more than 10, and so on. You can see that over time, the success rates of the two editors rise and converge, which is what you'd expect as users become more experienced. But crucially, we're seeing much better success with new users. So it's no surprise that we see Visual Editor as the recommended tool in editathons. Here are some lovely quotes from people who've run editathons recently. It's really great to see our tool making such a big difference in this process of getting new people into editing. The other thing I'd like to talk about is technology and research. When you put a lot of effort into solving hard problems, you often end up with a lot more than you set out for. For example, we all know the space race didn't just put a few people on the moon. NASA ended up inventing things like Tang, Velcro, and Teflon, right? Okay, maybe not. But they did invent a bunch of other things. Oh, and while we're on the subject of NASA, I did hear recently that NASA's EVA team are using Visual Editor on their wiki, and it's really helping with adoption. The more people we can convince to use MediaWiki in this way, the better technical feedback we'll get back from the community. So what I'm trying to show here is that there's a whole technological ecosystem around Visual Editor. On the right, you can see Parsoid, which is the new parser we had to build to make visual editing possible. And that in turn has made projects such as content translation possible, as well as other improved services like the mobile content service. Visual Editor has also been embedded into other projects such as structured discussions, which is really lowering the barrier to participating on talk pages. On the left, we have some code that started off in Visual Editor, but has since taken on a life of its own. Visual Editor had to create a new UI library to meet its complex demands, which we called VEUI, very imaginative. And that then became OUI. And now that project is bringing improved accessibility, right-to-left support, improved widgets, and consistent UI to projects across the MediaWiki platform. We've also recently been working on visual diffs, because naturally you'd expect to see a visual diff when you make Visual Editor. That project was possible because of Parsoid and Visual Editor's improved modeling of the document. And that work is being upstreamed so that it can work outside of Visual Editor on history pages. Let's not forget the technology developed for Visual Editor itself, the link inspector, one-click citations from a URL, usable template, table editing, image searching, and other bits and pieces. So I also want to talk a bit about the future. Occasionally, some of my friends ask me, hey, isn't that project you were working on Wikipedia finished now? And then I talk their ear off for half an hour until they regret asking. So here you go. One of the things we've always had under development is mobile support. We took some technological steps early on to ensure the editor would work on touch devices, as opposed to, say, Google Docs, where they took an approach that forced them to build native apps. And we've also stuck to some design principles throughout, such as avoiding interactions based on mouse hover. There's still a lot of work to fit more of the UI into that limited space and work out which tools to present to the user when. But we're in a great position to get this version of Visual Editor out of beta and made the primary editing experience like we did on desktop. By the way, some of you will have noticed the article I'm editing is about a roller coaster at Disneyland, and the very eagle-eyed might have spotted that I'm sitting on said roller coaster. I'm fully expecting that extreme Wikipedia editing will be the massive trend of 2019. Okay. Another thing that we've been working on recently is unifying the editing experience so that the hard work we've done improving the usability of the editor is available to Wikitext editors too, things such as those one-click citations. This should also help new editors make an easier transition to using Wikitext when the need arises. This is still in beta, and hopefully a lot of you will have had a chance to use it on Office Wiki, and there's still plenty to do on features, performance, and general bug fixing. And finally, looking a little further into the future, another thing that we talk about a lot on the editing team is the potential for multi-user editing. Some of you will know that C. Scott has spent the past 3 or 4 Wikimanias talking about the implications of this with the community. And whenever we've given proof of concept demos at hackathons, we've gotten a very enthusiastic feedback from the community. We've always designed Visual Editor in a way that makes implementing this not too difficult. And some of the work we've done recently on autosave, which was mentioned at the top, will make this even more feasible. So in summary, we really have come a long way in the last few years, especially in how we're perceived by the community. And we're now the primary editor for a significant portion of the community. The edit success rate is especially great for new users, which is exactly what we set out to do with this project. And we've built a stable and extensible platform for the future. And in doing so, we've seen work from the Visual Editor team spreading out across the organization. We've also got a lot of work in the pipeline and no shortage of ideas for the future of editing. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ed. We now have quite a bit of time, actually, for questions and discussion. So if you are here in the room with me and you have a question, there's a microphone right there. And if you are remote, we are taking questions on IRC. Do we have any yet? We currently do not have any. Here we go.
Yeah, I have some. Can you guys hear me? I have some good news for Alexander about the maps. He mentioned a number of problems with maps having to do with internationalization. It's actually true that right now maps only display the labels on the map in the language of the territory mapped rather than in the wiki where the map is. And he mentioned the community wish list item about maps, and I'm happy to tell him that, and everybody, that the collaboration team is working on those very problems. And we should actually be able to release that internationalization improvement in a couple weeks. And we're working to make maps in general more stable and easier to maintain. So I'll reach out to Alexander and talk about that offline, but I just wanted to make that, make his day, I hope.
Sure, that's great news.
So, Ed, I've got a question/response for you from Erin. So, first a correction, then a question. We did look at edit completion rates in the 2015 study, and at that time the rate of edit completions decreased compared to the control, Wikitext only. Has there been a controlled study since then that demonstrates the higher edit completion rate you said you were seeing?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I know that that study did look at the edit completion rate. My point was that it ignored data, ignored people who abandoned before they even typed. And so our raw data is looking at the total edit completion rate for all users. That's not a randomized A/B trial like Aaron's test was, but it does include everyone, whereas the original trial filtered out the people who clicked on edit and then abandoned straight away, which was kind of one of the things we were aiming for in the first place. So that's why I highlighted that study compared to the other data we have.
Thanks.
Do we have anything else? questions about structured data on Commons or Wikivoyage? Okay. If that's it.
Where are you in London?
Oh yeah, I didn't mention I'm in London. This is where I live. This is the home of football.
Oh.
For those of you who aren't clued in on that, that means it's the home of Arsenal Football Club. If there was a game on, it would be really nicely lit up, but unfortunately, you can just see the glow from the lights feeding the grass.
Okay then. We have, I think, something changed here. Could you advance a slide? Because then we have some time for Wiki Love. If anyone has any sort of shout outs or thanks or just expressions of gratitude or appreciation that they would like to share about anyone, now is your opportunity to do so. I'd be happy to bring a microphone to you if you want.
I just want to say I do love Visual Editor.
Yay.
And I love whoever that was.
Anything else?
The check's in the mail.
This is Anne Gomez. I just want to shout out to Zach for being just a really great collaborator. It's been really fun working with him or you, wherever you are, on all the campaigns. And it's thank you for your positivity and your energy and your commitment to delivering.
Online, Seddon, who apparently lost his mic, says he loves the Wikitext visual editor. It's just brilliant. And Paul says, thanks for the collaboration team being ahead of expectations with the maps work.
One thing that I realized I forgot to remind you all is that you can submit proposals for things to discuss in future metrics and activities meetings on, I assume, on Meta. I encourage you all to do so. Any other Wiki Love? Okay, I think that's it then. Thank you all so much for attending, and we'll see you next month, if not before.